Welcome to From Here to Eternity, a Gateway Seminary podcast about the nations. My name is Phil Hopkins. I'm the host. I'm professor of missions at Gateway Seminary. I've been here for a few years until recently, for about 20 years or so, I lived overseas. In this podcast, we address topics related to the cross-cultural spread of the gospel from here in California, across the U.S., and throughout the world. In these podcasts, these next couple podcasts are from the Evangelical Missiological Society. We had a meeting at Gateway Seminary on April 4th of 2025, the Southwest Regional Meeting, where we talked about topics related to ecclesiology and mission. And there were a number of people who presented, and in their presentations, we were able to record some of those. So we have a few of those here that have been recorded. Most of them are of pretty good quality. There are some that maybe are not so much, but we want to include those in this podcast segment. So there'll be a number of them that'll be spread out, talking from people from various backgrounds throughout the West Coast. Largely throughout the West Coast, from people from Fuller Seminary, from Cal Baptist, from Biola, from other different types of ministry organizations that are talking about ecclesiology and mission. So please enjoy. You'll see a number of different presentations that vary in length and that are quite unique to the people who, just as unique as the people who are presenting them. So we're thankful for those people. We're thankful that they have given us permission to record them, and we hope you all enjoy these podcasts, these presentations of these people. So enjoy, and please contact me with any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. My name is Jamie Sanchez. I'm on faculty at Talbot School of Theology. It's good to see all of my students here. Chris is also one of my students, Corolla. I also, aside from teaching, direct the research doctorates at Talbot School of Theology, which include a number of different PhDs in different fields. I serve with Ken on the board of directors for Evangelical Missiological Society, so it's good to be here. I work with a research team. There's three of us. One at Samford, one at Asbury, and then myself. And together we have collaborated with a grant from the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, which has funded our research the last 3 years in order to look at this, to gather the data for this study. And as we were looking and building the study in the first place, we were trying to decide what our focus would be. A lot of the literature that focus on refugees happens to generally be about refugees rather than capturing refugee voices themselves. That's changing a little bit. Some of that was because of access. Women were not as highlighted in the literature, mostly because a lot of refugees weren't highlighted in the literature. And so we wanted to look at women refugees specifically. We did some research through the Lit Review and landed on the larger topic of understanding resilience of women refugees. So what I'm going to present today is a portion of that study based on my data collection. Just to situate the study a little bit, they've been displaced and fled from and to just about every region of the world. We're all familiar with the situation. As of March, just a few days ago, I looked at the stat. There are 6.9 million Ukrainian refugees. Mostly since the current situation going on there. There is limited research, as I mentioned. Amongst the research that is out there, resilience has continued to pop up as a theme. And so, as I said, we looked at resilience amongst refugees. There's connections between faith and well-being, not just amongst refugee populations, but in general studies. Other studies show that refugees benefit by participating in a religion. These studies didn't necessarily focus only on Christianity. and in a religious community, right? So participation in being amongst a group is helpful for their well-being. Faith-based support for refugees impacts refugee well-being. So, the purpose of the study, as I mentioned overall, was to understand how women refugees describe factors that impact their resilience. We collected data from December 2022 to August 2023 in 3 different locations. There's 3 researchers. In total, we had 34 women refugees who were living in Poland, Czech Republic, and Germany, and they came from Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Ivory Coast. For our qual researchers out there, we did semi-structured interviews, first and second cycle coding. This study is based on the data that I collected. 13 Ukrainian women that included married, single, which included never married, divorced, widowed. Some mothers were amongst the participant group, ages 20 to 60s, and have been living in Teplice, which is a town in Czech Republic where I gathered the data, since February 2022. I was there in summer 2023, so a little over a year. It wasn't part of a criterion that they all be Christians, but they happen to all be Christians, either Evangelical or Orthodox. Here's just a little bit of a glimpse of who they are. These are, of course, pseudonyms to protect their identity, but you get an idea of who these women are. And the findings that I looked at in this portion of the study demonstrated a few important factors. Their own personal faith. I'll share some data that demonstrates what this meant for different participants. God's miracles, that's a term that they used. Churches providing for practical needs, and then having a sense of belonging in church was incredibly important. So, a personal faith, and that term, is really mobilized quite often in the evangelical circles. So this is kind of how I coded it for the circles that I'm presenting the data in. I don't know how it was talked about within the Orthodox participants. I didn't look for the distinguishing terms within the different groups. But all of the participants for the study stated that they were Christians. Most of the participants reflected on their personal connection with God as a source of strength since being displaced or since leaving Ukraine. Misha, she's a woman in her 40s, had this to say about her faith. Of course I believe in God, and thanks to God we have the strength to move on. We have courage to live through these obstacles, to move from one country to another, and especially when you believe in God, He will protect you and your kids. Let me get this out so that I'm not standing in front of the screen. And then she went on to say, but from the beginning of the war, the way I view God has changed. And so for her, there was a development of her faith over this time. I think we can all kind of relate to how suffering produces different responses within us with our faith. The way I view God has changed, and now I believe deeply and have a stronger faith than I had before. Katerina, she's 30-something, mother of 3. She said, what should I say? My testimony is all about God, because my God has helped me a lot. He has guided me step by step through the journey. He has encouraged me. He gave me strength to not leave my husband in Ukraine. So that story, her husband is very sick, and she wasn't sure if he was going to be able to make the trip. He wanted to stay behind so the family could be safe. She did not want to leave him behind. Figured out a way to travel with a sick husband and 3 kids across what it took to get to Poland. He gave me confidence that we would be okay. He guided me. And then she said, I was frustrated, but God. I was depressed, but God. I was confused, but God. My story is all about God. Many of the participants used this term, miracles. It kept popping up. Mara summarized some of her experience by exclaiming, it was a miracle. And Veronica basically said, every day is a miracle. Others, like Anna, who is married and just had 1 child, expanded on a particular situation, how she viewed God doing miracles for her. She shared the story of her journey. She was traveling alone with her young son. Her husband already lived in Czech Republic, so they were going to be reunited. She said, I was so terrified because of my son's health issues. If he eats something bad, food that's not fresh, he will start to vomit. When he starts to vomit, he can't stop without medical help in a hospital. I was terrified. I don't have food, I have money, but there aren't any grocery stores. But God did a miracle. The people from the surrounding villages started to bring us food, some vegetables, meat, and other food. They cooked soup, they cooked, and I kept this translation there, smashed potatoes, which I like better than mashed potatoes, it's fun. And they cooked boiled sausages on the grill, and it was all for refugees from Ukraine. And this is as she was leaving Ukraine. So there's long lines of buses that they're in for hours trying to get across the border. And these villages were preparing food for them, which she interpreted as a miracle from God. Kira, who was traveling with her young daughter, also shared her own miracle story. She said, when we arrived at the border, there was a man that had a minivan, and he said, women with children can get in the vehicle, and I will drive you across the border. Then when we got there, they checked our passports on the Poland side. We didn't really have to wait in a long line at the border. It was like a miracle, an answer from God. This help was totally unexpected for me and for my daughter. Now, many of the participants that I talked to in Teplitz were involved in different churches. Some of them were really involved as part of the congregation. One particular church had begun to translate their sermons in Ukrainian for the congregation, for the growing refugee congregation. Others were involved in other churches, and then others tangentially. And still, there was a lot of participants who reflected on how those churches met the needs of the refugees. Some of the participants talked about the ways the churches in Tippens helped them. Katerina said, the local church provided us with everything we needed. They even provided about $100 US. It was my first time to see checked money. They helped with food, clothes, shoes, whatever we needed. They gave us love and compassion. I was so grateful. They hugged us with this love. Kira, who's married and in her 50s, said, one of the believers in the church, my sister in Christ, helped me a lot with a new home. She found me a good place to stay, and then she paid my deposit. It was $1,000. She also spoke with the maintenance man and asked him to do the necessary maintenance for me. I like that, mostly because it's really minimal maintenance. And then belonging, right? If we think about cohesion and the importance of belonging to a group, particularly when you're in such trauma, right, and feeling so isolated already, the fact that the churches provided that was important to them. A number of participants found personal connections in the church broadly speaking, not one particular church. Zara, single woman in her 30s, left Ukraine alone. She shared, Alex, her friend from college, introduced me to churches here in Teplitz, and I found new friends in these churches. And Daria was a woman, she was widowed because of the last Ukrainian situation. So she lost her husband in the last one, this one happened, she has to escape with lost her husband, has escaped with her son. I found a church here in Teplitz, and people from this church were helpful. When I'm in church, I feel safe, and going to church has helped me survive these circumstances. Nicola, who's a married woman in her 40s, found safety in the local church and said, I should say that when I arrived in Talbot, I was scared and I didn't know if I would find a job and that everything would be okay. In this case, the church was very helpful for me. And the pastors and other friends from the church, those from the church really helped me a lot. They supported me, they prayed for me. I'm grateful. So those, again, this is just one part of my findings. It's not even all my findings from that, but I wanted to focus on this because of the connection to the conference. There's much more, and in fact, we've published some things. But based on this this part of the data, it shows the importance of a faith community and the consistency that they might provide. That's in the broader academic literature that I started with, right? That refugees might have well-being when they're part of the faith community. Much like other studies with different refugee populations group, our study shows that participants mobilize their personal faith as a way of overcoming adversity. So for some of the participants, it was a revisit to something that they already knew. I don't know the reason why. There was some dissonance between life in Ukraine and life as a refugee leaving Ukraine. All of us either have been in that experience or know people who are. Church communities and Talbot have provided a space to belong in their churches. And this really echoes one of the studies that informed our study, so showing that our data is in keeping with what others are finding, that faith communities are spaces of connection. So, as is in the academic world, we have to think about what else we're going to do. Our research group hopes that we can continue our research. We're planning on it. In fact, I'll go and get data collection this summer. We want to look at, now we want to bring our study to the States and try and understand what's going on with refugees here in North America, broadly speaking, probably just the United States. And looking at the hospitable nature of our findings from this current study, trying to understand how hospitality might impact refugee women resilience. And really expanding our definition of the church to include ministries from within the church, ESL classes, food banks, other types of things that are going on to understand what is happening. Hopefully we will find some really good situations. We might also leave space for how hospitality or lack thereof might impact negatively the resiliency amongst women. I think that the implications for the study for not just practitioners, not missiologists and academics broadly speaking, but just for people in churches that might be connected with refugees. They really are living all over the world, and there might be some barriers in connecting with them. Time, schedule. In fact, I had a terrible time gathering data in Southern California because of their schedule. Language, and yet I think that recognizing some simple things that can happen from the voices of refugee women themselves, giving a place to belong, providing for some needs, is one way that we can add to what they're doing. It's also a good reminder that there are amongst, and I don't have the data on this, refugees, lots and lots and lots of Christians, right? And so I think even pushing it further, I have another study on this from a few years ago about how there can be partnerships with Christians who happen to be refugees in the ministry, kind of dismantling this notion that refugees are only passive agents, but they can also be active in the work that the global church is involved in. I wanted to leave time for questions or comments. Corolla?
I think it's more a comment. I'm curious how it will look to talk to refugees who aren't in such a, I guess at the time, like a goodwill type situation in reference to like everybody is excited to help refugees from the Ukrainian war because it's so like we feel a certain way about it, or we have for the past couple of years, but refugees in the United States, how looking at why they're coming and where they're coming from will change what hospitality looks like from the church.
Yeah.
Especially in a conservative climate.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about doing, my team and I doing, is how is the church responding to care for refugees if funding is being cut to their agencies, those types of things. And yeah, the Ukrainian population at this time were well received in Europe, thank goodness, and in the States too. And not all groups are well received for various reasons. In fact, I had some of my own students ask about this, but with their background, trying to figure out why the church is not also as excited about helping different groups. And it's a valid question. We thought about doing a longitudinal study and going back to these places with these women and going, well, how does it change, right? Has the kind of new worn off? We'd have to figure out a way to do that in a way that doesn't re-traumatize them. Right, working with refugee women, refugees of any men or women, comes with our responsibility to care for them in the research process. Good question. Yes, it's in the back and then up front.
So I know when I was in Tucson, my wife was involved a lot with the International Rescue Committee there.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of participation by churches in refugees coming in, refugee families coming in, connecting them with churches, although they weren't all Christian, and they try to get them connected to the different faith-based communities. It's difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Have you looked at any of other existing data or other programs out there like that? This predated, obviously the Ukraine stuff.
Yeah.
Just wondering if there are parallels there or anything else out there in the literature.
Yeah, I haven't seen literature that focuses on any one particular kind of group. Here in Southern California, I worked with Voice of Refugees in Anaheim. That was the group that I was involved in just in general, and then hope to also get some data collected from people there. Refugees were quite busy, like either finding jobs or learning English or other things. So it was hard to connect with them. But yeah. Oh, up here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your research. I was a little surprised that you did not actually tell anything about the church that they are actually coming from, as if that is actually not very important. I thought that that's a very important information, because resilience is something to do with the culture where they are actually coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So culture is very much actually connected to the community that they are actually part of.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder why you are actually not looking at the community and not only at their personal faith. So I think that also has an implication, because when if you are actually looking at the Christian communities actually here in the US, we have all kinds of actually Christians from different cultures.
Yeah.
But we are very much siloed. That means every community want to actually protect their own culture,
Yeah.
not actually to extend to the other community. That means there's very little actually give and take away from this world Christianity that we have actually in the US.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that, so my question is actually, your research is not really actually giving us any hope about how we can actually use culture, or maybe the ideas of world Christianity actually, in order to understand who is other Christian, and in what way their Christianity is actually giving, really actually helping them to have the resilience.
Yeah. So to clarify, as a qualitative researcher, I didn't look for these things, right? This is the data that emerged after data analysis. So it's the data from the participants. I do think a good study maybe look at one particular church, but these were women from different churches, all of course Ukrainian women living in one particular culture. But yeah, my guess is that the data is probably transferable to other contexts in the way that data works. So my guess is that having a sense to belong, having a place to belong, meeting practical needs, God's miracles, personal faith would emerge in different cultural contexts, even if it was spoken about differently. I might be wrong, but that's my guess. Yeah.
What are the primary needs of people that come to the U.S. as refugees?
What are the primary needs? Yeah, there's the need. Well, okay, so people coming under government sponsorship or something, there is a responsibility to then pay back the money that was given them to get here within a certain amount of time. There's the housing, the navigation of the bureaucratic responsibilities, getting a driver's license, registering kids for school, those types of things. And then of course getting a job. Some of them are going to have some language needs, some might not. Those are the ones that come to the top of my mind. Kind of big. I mean, think about going to the DMV, just us going and navigating that. It's complicated. If they're coming alone without husbands, in this case, a lot of the women's husbands were in Ukraine because of responsibility to help fight the war. That's not the case with everyone. But if they're separated, and the women are the caretakers for not just children, but in-laws, older relatives, grandchildren sometimes, how do they go out and do the things and leave the kids behind? Mm-hmm. So those are the things that come in. Good question.
Yeah, JB, this was so interesting and really inspiring to think about the ways that God is at work there. I'm curious if in your research you saw barriers to resilience. Like I know that's a whole nother area, but did any of those things emerge on the flip side?
We didn't look at that, so we didn't design the study at all with any questions. like that. I do think the separation of families is hard. I do think that this particular group that I looked into, coming to a place, Czech Republic, was just like fraught with welcome. I mean, there are flags everywhere. They were very welcoming. So that was a little easier, although they were often talking about they can't wait to get home. In fact, one participant said, yeah, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all the things that I've been given, but I don't want to be here. I want to be home. And that's often a misnomer sometimes of refugees, broadly speaking, is that they want to not be where they are. And it's not true. A lot of people want to go home if it's safe for them and their families. But that's why we're kind of leaving open this next study. So hospitality, or is there lack of hospitality? How does that impact the resilience? That's the question. I think we have time for maybe one more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it, I know in the Czech Republic it was just Ukrainian. Now in the North American site you're broadening that base out to other refugees.
Yeah, we're going to broaden it out. And it wasn't intentional to only be Ukrainian. Like I went to a place where I didn't have any connections, and that happened to be what was available. And in Poland too, but part of that is the border connection. My third colleague who went to Germany, she's the one who got data from Syria and Ivory Coast. So it does depend on the receiving country.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Ukrainian, because a lot of them have that Christian background there too, so it wasn't surprising so much to see that kind of come through.
Yeah.
But again, the Syrian, how they would think about that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Comparison.
Yeah, and we did in our study design to understand faith practices or religious rituals. We didn't want to hone in only on Christianity, it just happened to emerge.
Right.
We wanted to understand what other faiths might know, people practicing other faiths might know, or what Christians are also doing well. I'm trying to leave it open, but yeah. Well, I think we're done. Thank you.